Hi, I'm J. Christian Adams. This is the Protecting Your Vote podcast from the Public Interest Legal Foundation. Today I have a special guest, Scott Walter, Capital Research. How are you doing, Scott?
Great. Good to be with you.
Indeed. So tell everybody what Capital Research is.
Capital Research Center is essentially the intel operation for the conservative movement. We study the left deeply and we expose it widely.
And one of the things you do is look at their funding streams. And I'll tell you, I did a project for Capital Research, I want to say about 14 years ago. I don't know, but it might have been the first time Capital Research looked at the funding streams into the election integrity space. And elections generally, election process might be a broader and more particular description of the area. They have been focused on this for a long time. When I was at the Justice Department, we used to get calls from all these groups. There's a ton of groups out there, ACLU, MALDEF, on and on and on. But they've only gotten bigger, and they've only gotten more focused on this. What do they do in the area of election administration, generally speaking?
Well, everything on the left sprawls, as you say, and there's virtually a bottomless well of money for them to do things, especially for them to do litigation. So obviously one thing they do is tons and tons of litigation, fighting every election integrity effort whatsoever. My personal recent favorite was when Mark Elias went to court in Ohio to try to stop a law that said you couldn't have federal monies coming in for things like the ballot initiatives, which it's breathtaking they'd fight for foreign money because, as you know, that's like an above 90% disapproved thing. I mean, everybody across the spectrum hates foreign money. We all remember when President Obama lied and said the Supreme Court was going to let foreign money in. But Mark Elias, however, is going to go out there and fight in litigation that way. So they do litigation, but another thing that they do that's massive is get out the vote work. Now, mostly they're doing get out the vote work using voter registration efforts. Obviously, I realize PILF fights hard on voter registration rolls being cleaned up. So you're trying to weed out bad registrations. They are just trying to massively increase registrations. And now, if they were doing that with, the Democrat National Committee's money or even 501c4's money or super PAC's money, that would all be just, it's kosher. It's a free country. Both sides do that. But what Capital Research Center is focused on in recent years is the massive amount of 501c3 private charitable foundation money that funds this voter registration effort and 501c3 public charities like the Voter Participation Center that does that. And that is not kosher if it's being done in a partisan way, and it is.
So the Voter Participation Center is involved in litigation in Kansas right now. One of our board members is one of the attorneys in the case. Astonishing stuff out of this case where they admit they use catalysts to pre-populate absentee ballot requests. They admit there's errors in their data. So a certain percentage, I think 5% are going to the wrong places. They're clearly designed to get out young Democrats to the polls. And they say so. It's not even a secret. Why is the left so focused on little niche issues like mail ballot requests in Kansas and willing to litigate over it? I mean, that seems like an abundance of wealth that there's no limits on what they're willing to do.
There isn't. And as you know, especially in litigation, I had a state, which will remain nameless, but the state Secretary of State called me up and said, will you talk to our general counsel? Because every time they do anything in this state that's at all focused on election integrity, of any kind, right, they instantly get sued. And now, the irony is they've never lost a lawsuit. This general counsel's been working there 5 years or more. He's never lost an actual suit, but he's had to face countless suits. And the thing about the wealth, he said, Scott, the absolute limit that of lawyers that I can put on a case is 5. And that's, it's a huge strain for him to put 5 lawyers on a case. He doesn't want to put 5 lawyers on a case. He has had over 80 lawyers on the other side in a courtroom. He's had cases where there were so many left-wing lawyers, like C3 money, charitable sector money. They've had so many lawyers on the other side, there were not seats in the courtroom.
Yeah, I've experienced that multiple times.
Yeah.
Galveston County, Texas, federal court. There were so many of the lawyers on the other side, they had to sit in the jury box and in the audience. Like there weren't even enough overflow seats in the jury box. So you can do the math there.
Yes.
And counsel table, there weren't enough seats. So now they lost the case, which adds to a bit of the fun.
Well, this is it, right? They lose case after case after case after case.
Yeah, there's no limits. And then big law. How's big law play into this with lawyers and talent and pro bono lawyers?
Oh, well, again, they have massive pro bono operations. I mean, we have a hard time wrapping our minds around these things, but this isn't quite legal. It isn't directly legal, although everything ends up in the law in America in a courtroom. But you mentioned MALDEF, right? Mexican American Legal Defense Education Fund. MALDEF and pretty much the entire Hispanic rights movement was just created out of thin air by the Ford Foundation. The whole thing. Wow. And, by the way, something else that you might have heard of, women's studies. Yeah. Literally, some program officer at the Ford Foundation just said, well, this stuff is working with the blacks, we should try this with women, and they invented the field of women's studies. Imagine all the horrors of American life that have come out of that. And again, it's just Ford snapping its fingers. I'll give you a further thing on that. Wally Olson did a great book some years ago on law schools and how
Wally Olson, like the Wally Olson.
Yes.
Okay.
This is Wally on. Years ago, I overlapped with. Now I don't agree with everything Wally does. Let me make it clear. Yeah. But we overlapped long ago at AEI, and he did a good book on law schools and about the left, how the left manipulates, takes over law schools, and we ran at capitalresearch.org. If you look up Walter Olson, and you can find this. What we did is we pulled out of the book all the stuff about the Ford Foundation in there. And when I called him up and I said, hey, could we use the Ford Foundation part about all that Ford's done to manipulate law schools? He laughed at me and he said, Scott, when I was working on the research for that book, I was so overwhelmed by everything that Ford does. He says, first of all, there's a pneumatic tube that connects the Ford Foundation press office and the front page editor of the New York Times because they issue a press release and they've got a front page New York Times story, right? Said, I honestly called my book agent and said, I don't know, maybe I should just write a book on the Ford Foundation. So, I mean, again, and that's one foundation.
Do you think the Ford Foundation now funds some renter Republicans?
Oh, you can be sure that their monies are buying renter Republicans through, of course, various grantees.
So let's do a service to some of our listeners. When you said the Ford Foundation, I thought of something because I have an answer to my question I'm going to ask you, but let's see what yours is. What are some products people shouldn't be buying that are funding left-wing causes? Now, I have one I see in the grocery store that I always skip that section, which we can get to. But is there something other than that particular cereal maker that is something to be avoided?
Well, it's very depressing when you get into that side of things because there are virtually no companies. Yeah. Now, Hobby Lobby, which works with my good friends over at your colleagues at the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, they struck a big blow for religious liberty under Obamacare. But let's put it this way. When people think of good companies, they think of Chick-fil-A, right? Yeah. But Chick-fil-A actually hired for their foundation a few years ago a lefty who started. I think he even gave to the SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, which is easily one of the most appalling things on the left.
I have a piece of new criterion called them the denunciation machine. I think.
Yes.
That they exist to denounce people.
Yeah, and they're still around. And by the way, you want to talk about money? I mean, they're really a hedge fund with a charity attached because they have hundreds of millions of dollars. And by the way, with tons of it in like offshore, the most evil capitalist things there are, right? Offshore banks and whatnot. SPLC's the fraud is off the charts.
One time, the Birmingham newspaper did a feature story on Morris Dees' mansion. A puff piece on real estate, and you look at it and like, oh, this is the Southern Poverty Law Center head. Yes. Okay, so the product I'm talking about is Kellogg's. Because the Kellogg's Foundation, which is not like Carnegie from 100 years ago, and they still have the same name. The Kellogg's Foundation, as I understand it, and the Kellogg's Corporation are still very linked. You talked about a pneumatic tube at Ford. they're funding the worst anti-conservative causes out there. In fact, they were funding attacks on Breitbart. They were funding attacks on election integrity just 10 years ago from the Kellogg's Foundation. So no special K for you. Skip those Rice Krispie treats. The Kellogg's Foundation is one of the worst.
Yeah, no. As I said, it is almost impossible to name a corporation that does good things, and tons of them go to bad things. It's just gruesome. So
tell everybody, you have a chart that I remember that talks about hard money expenditures, soft money expenditures, and campaigns, and then the biggest of all by X-fold is C3 expenditures.
Yeah.
Get out the vote, register people. This is something the right has not really understood for a long time, that the left uses C3s, charities, to effectively have a political purpose.
Yes. So we talk about the three rivers of political money that empty into the gulf of elections, and so the first river is the hard dollars, right? That's what normal people think of as political money, which is, say, you write a check to somebody's campaign or to the Democratic National Committee, that kind of thing. Everybody gets that, and that's the hard dollar river. And then the second river, the broadest name for it would be the soft money. That encompasses a lot of stuff. It encompasses super PACs, but it also encompasses 501c4s, and those are things like the National Rifle Association, League of Conservation Voters. Those are C4s. And then the third, which, by the way, was the original meaning of dark money. When the left coined it,
right.
It was about C4s only. Now they'll use it for anything. They'll use it for the Bradley Foundation, which reports every penny of its spending. But then the third river is the one that only Capital Research Center actually crunches the numbers on, and that's the 501c3, which is technically charities, right? Legally speaking, they're supposed to be charities. You get the tax deduction for writing the check. And by the way, we do not look at the whole 501c3 sector. We don't look at your house of worship. We don't look at the Boy Scouts, the Salvation Army, blah, blah. We only look at we call them public policy, right? Because they're trying to affect public policy one way or the other. Public Interest Legal Foundations is a C3. My Capital Research Center is a C3. Heritage Foundation. So the folks that care about public policy issues in that space, that's all we do. And by the way, we also don't count, just because it's too overwhelming, we don't count a penny that goes to colleges and universities, even though obviously there's all kinds of left-wing institutes and this, that, and the other. We don't count any of the cultural stuff, right? The symphony, the museum, blah, blah. And yet, of course, the Smithsonian here in D.C. is a grotesquely left-wing propaganda outfit, right? But we don't count that. So we're really gross. The point is, this C3 number I'm going to give you is very undercounted. Now, in 2020, which is the last one we've crunched the numbers for because you're years behind with the
Hold
C3
that thought.
stuff. Yeah.
I want to ask you next about that, but go ahead.
Yep. So for the hard dollars, you had it's like 13, 14 billion. By the way, these are for both sides, left and right, like about 14 billion. For the soft dollars, dark money, you had about 3.5 billion. And then for the C3s, you had about 35 billion. So the point is, the other two rivers combined are maybe half of the C3. And the other thing that matters is, so those are the rivers with everybody's money. How much of the water is blue and how much is red, right? Yeah. So in the hard dollar river, and by the way, this has been true for election cycle after election cycle, the left and the Democrats have some advantage, but it's not too bad, maybe 60-40 at worst. And then in the dark money thing, they have just a slight advantage, and part of that's because Republicans have gotten good at raising super PAC money, and most of the money in that river is super PACs. So there's, again, a slight advantage. For 2020 in the C3 river, it was more than 10-1 left. More than 10.
That's because most conservatives or Republicans or right-leaning people think of C3s as real charities, the Salvation Army, the church, like those sorts, food banks.
Yeah.
Public interest legal foundations is C3. We're a charity. We rely on donations. Capital Research Center is a charity. You rely on donations. But on the left, charities are activists. It's like a given. And on the right, you think charities are like food banks. And it's not that way. That's why it's a 10-to-1 imbalance between left and right.
We mentioned that voter participation center earlier. They're a C3, and in an election year, they will spend 2/3 of their money on Democrat micro-targeting firms.
Like Catalyst too.
Yeah.
They use Catalyst. That came out.
Catalyst is a for-profit.
Yeah. So I want to ask you a question. I'm on with Scott Walter at Capital Research Center. You live in a time warp, okay? You've got like a 2-year time warp that I'd like you to talk about, and the extent to which you're trapped in the time warp, or you have ways to work around the time warp, which I don't think you do. But you're getting data from 990s, from public IRS disclosures from like 2 years ago is the most recent stuff you can get.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And so how do you deal with the lag? Is there any effort to address this lag through IRS regs? I mean, it's like you're stuck.
You're right, because the way the a 501c, whether it's C3, C4, whatever, the IRS rule is that you're supposed to disclose things 6 months after the end of your fiscal year, 5 months after the end of your fiscal year, but you get an automatic 6-month extension. So you're right. It's actually almost a full year before it goes out. And that's from you filing it with the IRS. And then, of course, we have to either go knock on your door and say, let me have your IRS filing, or it has to go up on the IRS website, or there's some other places that post them to, like ProPublica. So the research is inherently a long way behind. And the other thing is, there's not, they're not going to change, there's
no workaround.
No, there's not really a workaround. No. Well, we do, now, there are people that we care a lot about, like the Arabella Advisors Empire, and we do go knock on their doors, because we know November 15th, they got to file.
So we'll close with this fun little vignette. I have found a black swan in this space that's quite fun. And that is occasionally some left-wing groups mistakenly publish an unredacted Schedule B by mistake.
Yes,
and is that a treat?
We've had that. We've knocked on doors and been handed an unredacted one.
Tell everybody what that means.
Yeah. So for a 501c3, part of your IRS filing is the Schedule B, which is your biggest donors and how much they gave you. Now, by law, you have to make public the amounts, but you can redact out the names. But you are not required to redact out the names. And by the way, can we throw one, since we're in a good legal place here? My favorite example of that was there's a teeny tiny fake group called Fix the Court.
Oh, yeah.
And they are huge. Sheldon Whitehouse uses their stuff all the time. The Washington Post and the New York Times treat them as these Solons, the Solomons on high. It's one dude in his apartment, and I think I want to say Brooklyn, right? But one guy in Brooklyn. It was launched out of the Arabella Advisors Network, of course. And it it's part of the smearing of Alito and the smearing of Justice Thomas and all this garbage. And they filed a 990 EZ form, which is what you file if you have less than $50,000 in revenue. But of course, we looked at Arabella and other places, and we saw, well, now, wait a minute, Hewlett gave them over $100,000, and Arabella gave them over $100,000. Over 100 plus over 100, that's more than 50,000. So we sent this tidbit to a good reporter friend, Gabe Kaminsky, who called up the little dude in his apartment and said, here's evidence you got over $200,000. What are you doing filing an EZ form? The kid freaked out. It's like, I'm refiling, right? So he races to refile, and then he sends it to the reporter. And then he calls up the reporter because he realizes, oh my God, I didn't redact it. I put down the actual names of the people who gave me the money. oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. Now, the irony is, what does this little twerp spend his life doing but screaming that Clarence Thomas didn't reveal everything you... Now, whereas Clarence Thomas actually did reveal everything he legally was required to reveal, but this kid is hysterical that he has revealed something, even though what he revealed is actually a public record from the other side. The people who gave him the money have already publicly disclosed they gave the money. So he doesn't even begin to understand any of this. And by the way, a week or two later, he got another call from the reporter saying, wait a minute, you have an entire page on your website covered in call your congressman about this, write your senator about that, right? Just think, campaign after campaign after campaign. Legally speaking, that is grassroots lobbying. And of course, on your IRS forms, you're supposed to disclose your lobbying. Well, what he had disclosed is he had no lobbying. So this kid is a pathetic fool, doesn't understand the simplest law that applies to him, is wildly hypocritical about trying to suppress information that should be disclosed about money he's getting. I mean, you can't make... They would drum you out of the Subtle Fiction Writers League if you put it in a novel.
Right. Scott, tell everybody your website and how they can find more information.
Well, we have two great websites. One is capitalresearch.org, which is our main site and has, for Zuckbucks, for instance, that's the best place in the world to go looking for Zuckbucks info. And then we also have influencewatch.org, which is our Wikipedia of special interests, unions, foundations, activist groups, your friend Mark Elias, on and on.
Oh, you don't know how good of a friend he is. So there's so much I could say. We could hold a second podcast on this. I will say one thing. I have asked Mark Elias and his staff for a signed publicity shot to put on our wall here, and they won't send one. I'm stunned. It's such a slight. But if you're out there watching, please, we'll put it up. Sign it, please. We're big fans of Mark Elias, as you shall see shortly after this podcast. I'm Christian Adams, President of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. You've been watching Protecting Your Vote with Scott Walter. If you'd like more information about his charity or the Public Interest Legal Foundation, C3, you can go to publicinterestlegal.org. Till next time, thank you for joining us.